Where did you put my slides on here? Oh, okay. All right, let me just get the slideshow started. All right, so this talk, kind of reframing abundance, talking about open tools, free games, and distributed culture, definitely in light of my work on zines and also sort of alternative tools and alternative game development. So let's go. So I'm just going to start off with some things that I and my friends have found kind of annoying when people say them about our non-commercial games or other projects. I think you might laugh a bit if someone has said them about your own work, or maybe if you've said or thought these kind of things yourself, like maybe this talk will kind of get you start thinking about the ideological assumptions that are built into this. So that's a good start. You can use those skills on a real project, or it's free and it only takes 10 minutes to play, or obviously your work is valuable, but I'm talking about people who want to make a career doing this. Basically, these sorts of statements can be rough to hear because they kind of reinforce non-commercial and freely available work as marginal to the real products of the gaming industry. So it treats it as like a field of talent, tools, new ideas, and of course also the care work of making space for the types of narratives and forms of representation that are marginal to the games industry, that it treats as kind of free to swoop in on and pick and choose from and use for their own purposes. But video games didn't really start as an industry. They started as time theft by programmers who were in university, government, and military labs who were meant to be doing something else. So while we can also grapple with the entanglements with like the military and kind of technological control society, which are pillars of the game industry as well, we kind of have to also pay attention to these illicit beginnings, as well as the long history of software crackers, personal computer users, and those who maintain their own strange gardens out on the internet, as equally relevant as the kind of hyper-competitive commercial formation that the games industry is currently in. So who am I? I started writing about games in around 2013 or 2014 for a now defunct but still available on archive.org and very awesome magazine called The Arcade Review. I was focused on the RPG Maker scene of the time and how it was kind of influenced by older horror games, which were getting translated by fan translators, and how people were using the engine against the grain to make games that were often distributed for free online. I finished college, I interned at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, which has a really interesting media arts collection, but also was putting on an exhibition of video games at the same time, which I found like they were totally divided, and kind of the video games were treated as very safe and underwhelming, whereas I found how the media art was displayed to be very inspiring. It didn't really excite me like the stuff that I was finding online did. So I became really curious about looking at game art exhibitions from a historical perspective, like how are they contextualizing these things and how is the gallery space used? So as a part of following that research, I got to do some really interesting things like putting together exhibitions and workshops on the topic. I was really fascinated by the possibilities that communities like Bitsy had in terms of preservation and open source like interoperable games. And I was also inspired by zines and old internet culture that kind of prioritize this accessible distribution and the preservation of niche topics in ways that, the sort of mainstream timeline of game history did not really officially allow. So that was great, but I also graduated from my postgraduate research basically directly into the COVID-19 pandemic. So suddenly the in-person events and hands-on exhibitions that I was used to were in very, very low demand for the foreseeable future. And I'd already really been struggling with the feeling that the work I valued would always kind of be considered secondary to these more, kind of large-scale commercial exhibitions. So I was kind of feeling very burnt out and trying to pivot myself to doing online event organization on a freelance basis, really expedited that process. And it turned out to just be a better idea to get a day job. And adapting to that is basically what I've been up to since mid-2021, on the official employment front anyways. Since then, though, I've kind of continued making free interactive fiction web games, mostly using niche open source engines, and through the Collective Domino Club, whose members also make very similar work. I also started a small zine distro that goes around to zine fairs in Edinburgh, Dundee, and Carlisle. And I've even written a novel and started a second one. So obviously I remain productive despite this not being kind of my formal education or career. I really do subscribe to the theory of a personal art practice being something that's kind of like an excretion, like it's just going to kind of come out of you anyways. And I've found these practices and the other game collectives that we've kind of met through, being Domino Club online, the zinesters and writers that I meet at zine fairs, to be like really, really nourishing and really inspiring. And the people who are doing these things, I feel like, especially nowadays, they're doing them against enormous odds. They're working against the odds that basically a process like enclosure has happened to every sort of new media that has emerged from everyday cultural activities. So by like enclosure, I kind of mean the historical process that is basically considered to historically precede capitalism and wage labor in the UK, where there used to be common areas where subsistence crops could be grown, but they were privatized by a landowner, and then the economy shifted so that the inhabitants had to work or pay rents to use that land to survive, rather than, just being able to kind of share it and share the benefits of it. So how does this process repeat in the case of, kind of the shared and freely given labor that people give around video games? Basically, free development kind of gets shut down by, there's a very long study of like how, Nintendo used various forms of technology to enforce their IP, and also kind of these, cultural spectacles of Mario destroying the bootleg NES cartridges and things like that. It's kind of this thing where like participating in storefronts or being able to distribute your work becomes a thing that you have to start like getting licenses or paying rents to be able to do, and it squeezes out amateurs and kind of forces people to professionalize. And despite how, kind of because it's large technological corporations doing this, despite how well-resourced and legally reinforced things like IP law and licensing can be, almost to the point where it seems, hard to imagine alternatives, a lot of people are still working against that or despite that. And I think it's really important to kind of foster historical and critical attention on that. So this is kind of the art nerd portion. So the sociologist H.S. Becker wrote the study Art Worlds that kind of emerged from his interest when he was working as, I think, a session pianist. Out of all the kind of network of people that went into, one kind of performance of art or one, masterpiece painting or something. So it needs basically to exist in a tradition of others who are doing the same sort of practice. It needs surrounding critical infrastructure to draw attention to, what's good and what's bad here. And it needs a variety of, the kind of professional artists and also passionate amateurs who are invested in the medium and kind of follow it and make their own contributions. It needs the staff at museums and galleries, for example, and even, the materials and people who work at the factories, which make, kind of the standardized art supplies that art students use nowadays. And similarly, studying contemporary art production, Gregory Cholet identifies many of these practices he describes as dark matter of the arts field, which are kept invisible by and invisible to official culture, yet essential to the form it takes and process it evolves. And basically what I'm saying is that a lot of kind of the free games, web development stuff is this, excluded dark matter of video games, kind of as a more mainstream concept. The art critic Hito Steyr also observes that, kind of the prestige of big budget artworks, whether they be films or AAA games or kind of the rarefied, super artist class that are represented by, these very, very luxurious international galleries. They kind of rely on fostering this exclusion and hierarchy and envy of being included. So she says here, the more unpaid interns, the more expensive the art. So in the system, not anyone can be a modest or sustainable success for the system to reproduce itself, which I think is obviously evidenced in, the ongoing cutbacks and layoffs and shutdowns of studios, despite, even, creating very popular projects. They weren't just successful enough. It kind of relies on appropriating this passion and interest for free. And, many of the people who do this are kind of lucky to see, a few dollars in their PayPal account as a result. So the pyramid, which kind of directs, all these resources and attention up towards a tiny tip, starts to look like eventually it's going to take the form of a pyramid scheme. So this is kind of my pep talk for instead, upending this pyramid and attending to these marginal practices, not really as something that needs to beg for presence alongside the commercial history of gaming, but kind of, it's always there, it's proceeding, and it's kind of fed upon by the mainstream industry. So let's consider the concept of abundance. What do you think of? Maybe it's like a, very Norman Roswell-esque holiday dinner table, or, a beautiful, lush, natural landscape, or maybe even this sort of like futuristic society if meme. So these abstract depictions are kind of, they're kind of formalized, they're kind of orderly. We don't really associate abundance with anything that's kind of purely a lot of things. In fact, things that are abundant can be a bit too intimidating. The philosopher George Bataille called this immense output of solar energy that hits the Earth that far exceeds what even like all of the living plants, all of the living creatures, like everything, like even if we like put solar panels on every, inch of land, like we would not be able to use all of it. It would just be too much. And this is a concept that he called the accursed share. And it's basically this idea that excess underlies all life and that there has to be waste, kind of incorporated into the process of life. It can be wasted on, sort of beautiful but unnecessary things like, artistic expression or non-procreative sexuality, or, it could be these terrible wasteful things like war and violence. And excess can also kind of reinforce societal order. It can kind of be, a pressure valve or like a building, monuments to like the way that society now is great, right? Or it can be used kind of as this disruptive force. So from that perspective, an uneasy element to abundance emerges, which kind of explains our attempts to rationalize it. I'm thinking of kind of the cringe feeling that you get when you regard the corny poetry or fan art that seemed to flow out of you as a kid, or the derision aimed at these sort of cumulative monuments to that excess and abundance, like, the DeviantArt Sonic fandom. But isn't this kind of also its own form of abundance? We have this fire hose of passionate and strange work, which is mostly naive or indifferent to like, kind of the mainstream notions of good game design or practice, that's represented by, if you just look at the new games tab on a site like Itch.io or something. And this can be overwhelming. Like, how do you even know where to start if you're, what is this? And the internet has made us kind of more aware of this abundance, I think. If it's always been something that kind of existed on like a private personal level, now like everyone is aware of everyone else's. So knowing that we're seeing only like an indefinitesimal portion of it can kind of inspire a type of dread. And past a point, I think it kind of can lead you to conclude that like art has to be culled into, this representative sample. It needs to be able to be like pinned down as a style or movement, and like, there's proper techniques, there's proper subjects, and it's like optimized to do really well within the social media algorithms. So to keep indulging the capability without having like one of these, kind of official elements structuring it, that can seem kind of, like a weird delusion. Like, why are you doing that? But I feel like sometimes this discomfort with abundance can be like, oops, not yet, can be locking us into the way that things are, because politically we have, this idea of like, oh, we have to make tough choices, we have to privatize all these things, you have to, run everything or budget everything like a business. In response to, anxiety over climate change and habitat depletion, like it's kind of put on the individual, like, oh, don't waste this, don't, kind of Instead of being like, what are the structures that are kind of like enclosing and appropriating these things in the first place? Even like as we have less and less free time, because obviously you have to like work more to get all this stuff done, you kind of incorporate this idea of self-improvement. Like, you can't just make something for its own sake. It always has to be, monetizable, or, maybe it has to, reach a certain metrics on social media or whatever. And if it doesn't, this sort of feeling of disappointment and inadequacy in your own abilities kind of starts to seep in. But and that definitely happened to me when I was kind of feeling quite burnt out. But starting to think of my creativity as something that was abundant rather than something that kind of has to compete to survive in this sort of manufactured scarcity is one of the main things that kind of kept me going through, all the dry spells and setbacks and frustrations of, just kind of things that happen in your life as you're going along. So, I make my zines, I write, I do interactive fiction games, I doodle, I cook for people, I do joke around, and all these things are a record of my mindset and experiences over time. Even, stuff I end up doing because I don't really have an objective reason to. So it just is kind of like solar energy in a way that it comes out, whatever is going on. But even more importantly, even when I'm not personally doing these things, there's still kind of the community and circuits where people can find support and feedback if they're out there doing these things. So, I don't know. Do we really need like these sort of high-profile opportunities to make it that are kind of framed, in terms of acclaim or, prestige? And, of course, these opportunities kind of demand, more work to go into them, even more complicated application processes, and, their number and stability also is dwindling. I think this kind of reinforces the idea that like making something is this rare and unique skill when really, it should be something that everyone's doing all the time. The scarcer an opportunity is, the more tests are needed to ensure that it goes to the most worthy thing, but that kind of leads to becoming a very narrow view of what's good and what's possible. So yeah, this is a great quote from Marina Kataka, who wrote this article, Divest from the Video Games Industry, and I think that's very much my own relationship to video games as an industry now that I am, kind of fully sidelined from it. But kind of attending to this abundance, it can be very uncomfortable and confusing at first. Like, yes, just kind of aimlessly scrolling through the new tab on itch. But it shifts the focus towards, seeing that, this sort of multiplicity contributing has always been the foundation of like what we kind of consider like established and great works anyways. And I think we can kind of use this idea of excess to kind of disrupt, if not, single-handedly, bringing down everything that's wrong in society with our free web games, like, at least, being able to open people up to the possibility that there are other things that are worth doing and worth considering. And I think given, all the instability that's going, especially through the games industry right now, it's kind of vital to, look at this weird stuff, to envision a path where we kind of have the autonomy to divest from the video games industry and kind of make things and live life for our values and not for the clock. So here are some things that I've made with some small tools and web-based engines and what is unique about them. So this is one of my RPG Maker MV games. These are fun. RPG Maker is not strictly open source or free, but it's fun because you can just drag and drop. It comes with a bunch of like default chipsets, and you can also like put it right in a web page now, which is really super because you used to have to download that. And the crazy thing is you can also do very rudimentary 3D with it, which is something that I experimented with another one of my games, though it is kind of tricky, but it was worth it for the effect in this case. This is my most recent project, which was made in Jupyter Engine, which was made by my friend Kendall, who is from Domino Club. And this is a really cool kind of text-based engine that lets you make sort of what has been called interface dramas. So they simulate, clicking around on a computer, or clicking around going to different websites. So there's this one. This is a Construct 2 game about going to a cat show and looking at all the different kinds of cats and pointing at the cats that you like. Construct 2, I think, grew out of Multimedia Fusion, which is, again, kind of one of those things that I think that one grew out of Click and Play, which was kind of a software for kids to make things very simply. And again, it's not like strictly open source in this case, but it does make these sort of cool things that you can put directly in a web page. Bitsy/Bipsy. So Bipsy is kind of a fork of Bitsy that has a few different features and also a different interface. But either way, it's just been around for a few years as just this really cool thing for making very simplified pixel art games that you can do a lot of neat stuff with if you dig into them, but also like you can just kind of start drawing and making things interact right away if you want to make something like where someone walks around or just talks to people. So it's really cool in that sense. Twine, of course, is around for a while. It's great for, managing a lot of text. It can be tricky. I feel like I don't really like working in Twine as much because it's a web app now, which kind of bothers me because I've gotten like so into this that I now just kind of have my files open in Sublime Text and just kind of are typing this stuff. But it is kind of, there's a lot of, there's a big community around it that will kind of definitely help you make it look however you want and figure out most of the behaviors. So that's for any sort of like hypertext fiction. Ren.js, this is one for putting visual novel style stuff in the browser directly. It's kind of based on RenP, but that you can, but I think RenP you can also embed now as well. This one's fun. It's the scripting is very, very easy, and then you just kind of make the images and kind of set the timings for when images change and things. Flick Guy, this is a fun one. So this is kind of drawn off of Flick Game, which is one where you kind of draw the picture and clicking on the particular colors, you can set what alternate picture it goes to. So that's kind of like very, kind of rudimentary interaction. This is kind of one of those that it functions similarly, but it lets you make kind of very simple pixel art doll maker type things. And it has great randomize and remix settings that kind of let you do whatever you want with it. Which this is another Candle one. They make very awesome stuff. This is Videotome, which is kind of a very particular, very focused text game maker that you can do a lot of stuff with the backgrounds and the effects on. It's fairly linear, though I think there's now like Videotome Super and various other iterations that now have expanded what you can do with it, and it can kind of track variables and have branching paths and stuff. Tape Window, this one's fun. It's just kind of a text game format that's based on the Silver Case series of games, so you can set different text boxes and backgrounds, and images can kind of slide in and out whenever you want them to. Google Docs and PDFs. Sometimes if you're making a zine, if you want to kind of prototype something as as a journal game or tabletop game in the first place, those are honestly, it can sometimes just be as simple as that. And also don't knock just making HTML pages. The one over there is kind of my own kind of sub part of my personal website, where I made it like kind of interactive and different things to do based on links and going through different menus. And it's very much inspired by this weird sex game that I was kind of obsessed with. Too young to be playing them officially, but this was entirely done in HTML and like static images, and this was kind of what you did when you were extremely bored with internet access in like 2006. All right. So the benefits of kind of exploring these types of methods and games. This is what most of my projects look like. I just kind of have them open in Sublime Text, and it has like, kind of the main document where you can do the scripting, where you do like the events and stuff, and there's usually some sort of style sheet or settings or various ones where you kind of tweak, how it actually looks or how things function. And you can usually test it just by setting up, either just by like clicking on the actual like output, HTML document, or setting up a small server on your own computer, which is awesome. And the great thing about this is it makes them very portable. It makes them very interoperable. What's going on in the background is this thing called World of Bitsy, which kind of compiles tile sets from every Bitsy game. I think at a certain point. I don't know if it's consistently updated. And then it just kind of puts all the tiles like randomly next to each other. And you can click on, if there's an interesting patch of tiles, it will show you what game they're actually from. And this is only possible because like the code of a Bitsy game is, so kind of human readable and, possible to interact with in that way. So yeah, so that's me, basically. I have my personal website, which has a lot of my past writing and stuff on it. I'm on Mastodon. If you use that, I'm also trying to be more present on Blue Sky, and my itch page where I post most of my projects is Colio_kin. And if you're really curious about this, domino.gallery is the Domino Club website, and they have a randomizer, so you can just kind of jump in and see a random game, and I think that's super cool, and you should probably try it. Thank you very much.
I think we've got a few minutes for questions if anyone would like to.
Yes, of course. Hello.
Hello. I'm actually interested in kind of participating in zines as well.
Yes.
I'm at the very, very start of it. I just did like a couple of YouTube tutorials, and I'm just a big noob. Could you kind of add to how would I go about, as a complete beginner, doing a zine?
I think that's awesome, because being a complete beginner is kind of the best thing that you can be in that case. When you say YouTube tutorials, do you know how to like make an 8-page zine out of a single piece of sheet? That's awesome. So the cool thing about that is once you've made one of those, like you can just kind of draw, whatever. I think this is like the first time I made a zine. This is what I did, is I got a sheet of paper. And the thing is that all the sheets of paper are kind of proportionally the same. So if you get if it's easier to work on a larger scale, you can get like an A4. I think A4 is the bigger one. You can get like an A4 one, and then you can copy it and make copies. Like once you've like drawn on it, unfold it, put it in the Xerox thing, and then you can get the A5 copies that are just kind of the typical paper. That's cool. Take some copies to Glasgow Zine Library, which is very awesome.
Are there any other places in Glasgow?
Yes, so I would say Good Press will distribute your stuff for you. I've also given some to Typewronger over in Edinburgh, so they're pretty good about that. They also give you the money up front there, which is that's kind of cool. If they're like, if you're bringing them something interesting, they'll be like, okay, like we'll just give you like 2/3 of the face value right off the bat. So that's really cool. But yeah, just in terms of getting it out there, I would say, most of the people that I know that kind of do zines, I mean, they also post them on Itch. I think people do go on Itch looking for zines. So, make a nice Itch page, like kind of customize it a bit, make it look cool, kind of pick some of the cooler looking bits to make like the thumbnail image. I don't know. I'm sorry if this is all very basic, but this is just kind of as far as I go with it as well. I think the thing is that it kind of, resists overly formalizing it, because then, like, past a certain point of like, oh, it has to be formatted like this, like you're just kind of making a book, right? So I think just kind of being easy with it and just kind of like finding places. At zine fairs, don't be afraid to ask people if they want to swap. That is cool. I always like when people do that at my table. If someone is mean to you about it, well, I don't think that's very nice. I think people should accept swapping. But yes, that's.
That was really helpful.
Thank you. Yes.
In terms of this as like a counterculture scene,
Yeah.
are you seeing any trends or any, particularly in the content or the technology which is emerging in this mass?
I think in terms of Domino Club specifically, we're kind of inspired by like weird and perverted old sci-fi movies. Like I'm definitely like, I think one of my biggest like cultural inspirations is the film Dark Star. But yeah, so I think, I don't know, like the area that I'm in is definitely like, it's very like text game oriented. It's very, kind of drawing on like all these various traditions of science fiction and kind of combining them or like riffing on them in weird ways. I'm trying to see if there's, I don't know if there's other stuff. I don't know. I like the web-based engines. I think they're good. I don't really know much about the world of apps. That's pretty alien to me, even though as I have a phone. Yeah, I don't know. I know like 2 or 3 other kind of collectives who, I guess the way the Domino Club works is that we all kind of set a period of time during the year, and it's kind of like a jam, like a game jam period, but it's like a month long. And then all the games are kind of compiled and released at the end of that, but they're all anonymous at the time. And then, 2 weeks later after we've all played them, we'll kind of like do like a little award, like pseudo awards show for ourselves where we reveal who did everything. And that's really fun. And I think there's like 2 or 3 other groups that kind of have taken that format now since we started that. So I don't know, like doing it with a bunch of friends is the trend, which though that is kind of the definition of a trend. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm in education. I can teach game dev stuff, and this was really interesting because it is always on my mind. Obviously, like the way our universities work, there's a lot of emphasis on making it professionally as a job.
Yeah.
And then I also try, and where I can, because I'm unfortunately not at an arts university, sneak in as much as I can about like games can also be expressive. You can make them for expressive purposes to say something to the world. And it seems like what you were talking about is there's those 2 aspects, and then there's also just making stuff because you just make stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm interested in is I can see what I can do to help students make games professionally, obviously. And I think I'm helping to try and push the art side as well. Is there anything you could do with this, or should this be something that is completely hands off?
I don't know. I think it's contextual, and I think you can encourage it. Like, I think, kind of knowing that like, oh, there's like, there's kind of like a professional side of like developing your games practice, and there's also like kind of a more personal expressive side. That was different from like kind of being exposed to like zines or being exposed to like, just kind of look at this, this specific, collection of games. I guess there were kind of like, kind of informal exhibitions where it's just like a bunch of stuff that like people who are in the area have made. And I think being exposed to that was kind of, it was kind of a different experience than kind of like intellectually like knowing like, okay, there's like the expressive games, and there's like, there's like the stuff that's just work, right? So yeah, I think exposing to that, part of it is context, because I think like with Domino Club, like I'm not the most techie person in it. I don't really have a programming background, and some of the other people do. So it's really like a lot of kind of sharing, you know, how these engines work, or I've made this tool that does this. So kind of surrounding yourself with people and kind of making those connections is a big part of it, which was tricky and took a while for me because I'm very shy. So yeah, I think it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of a different thing to be exposed to than just kind of, because yeah, I think in every field you kind of get that, like you kind of get like, you know, the film school, like these are the movies, and like you may be like briefly exposed to like, you know, Greg Araki or George Kuchar like on the side, right? Like, but you know, kind of knowing that there was like a guy in the past that did that is different than being like, okay, like here's what, you know, here's like the kind of amateur filmmaking that's going on in my area right now. So yeah, I guess that would be my recommendation if you kind of wanted to like make that connection for people. Yes.
Thanks very much to Anne.